Welcome, everyone, to the Halloween special. Mark is here with us to enjoy our favorite time of the year, the spooky season. Mark up from Markio Soup, and he has his own Halloween special coming up later
Uh-huh.
in the week,
Yep.
where if you have not put in your short stories for Mark to judge and read out, you should do so very soon. Uh, but today, we are going to talk about the origin and history of Halloween, All Hallows Tide, Punky Night, Dia De Los Muertos, Winter Nights, anything that you want to call this
Okay.
holiday, Samhain or
Okay.
otherwise. We are
Uh-huh.
going to talk about the entire history and origin of Halloween, where this holiday comes from, why it fell out of favor in certain places, and
hmm
why we celebrate it now. Mark's got
Yeah,
the scoreboard ready, and
I
Mark has
have.
been studying. I saw him.
No. I just happened to pick up every year. I pick up the same book. It's called Trick or Treat, by Lisa Morton,
It's a
A
good book.
History of Halloween. It is
Yes.
it is a good book, and I get so far into it, and then I put it down again. And this year, I thought I'd just peruse. I
Just
haven't been.
brush up.
I haven't been. I haven't been. It's fine. It'll be fine. But anyway, so today it's Frightlin versus Spook.
Thank you
So
very much. I
yes, you're
appreciate
very welcome.
it. Okay, Mark, the first question,
Uh-huh.
the one which you will see all over the internet, everywhere
Yes.
and always, is Halloween based on an ancient Irish pagan festival?
Hmm. This is a difficult one because you say Irish, but also these days most of the Celtic fringe will somehow try and claim a connection to this sort of thing.
Hmm.
And I am going to say that almost certainly there's coincidence, but they're not connected.
Ooh, very good, Mark. So this is debated,
Okay.
because the date of Halloween is certainly on the Irish quarter day of Samhain.
Uh-huh.
But as you said, as for other Celtic nations, there's no evidence that this holiday is really anything but early medieval.
Yeah.
Roud, who wrote the English year, says that certainly there's no evidence of the holiday ever having existed, at least in the British Isles, before the Christian festival of All Hallowtide. But archaeologically speaking as well, there's no evidence of god worship. There's no evidence of veneration.
hmm
Um, However, Ireland is the debated one because we
Yeah.
do have a name for the holiday. We will get into what that holiday actually is. So,
hmm
second question,
Okay.
is Samhain an ancient Irish holiday?
Uh, no. I'm going to
Ooh.
say, and the reason why I'm going to say that
Mm-hmm.
is that the word describes, uh, it describes a moment in the calendar. It's not necessarily a
Ah,
festival, but it's a
very
very good
good,
time for a
Mark.
festival, though.
Give yourself a gold star, 10 points.
Thank you.
See, this
Thank
is
you.
what happens when
10
you
points.
study. Look at you, head boy today. So, is Samhain an ancient Irish holiday? Yes, but as Mark
Yeah.
just said, it might only be one of the quarter days.
Mm.
And because it's only attested as far back as the ninth century. That's all we
Yeah.
have. We have if there's mention of it in Torach Évra, which is the 10th century Irish mythology tale. And it's mentioned, the earliest it's mentioned is in Sanus Cormac, which is Cormac's glossary,
Mhm.
but that's all we know about it.
Yeah.
So let's talk about what does Samhain mean? What does it mean?
Well, it's named after a guy called Sam Hain
No,
who
Mark,
wi-
stop it. Don't, don't.
So yeah, this is how we ended last time, isn't it?
What does
uh
the word really mean?
Sewin. Oh, is it Summer's End?
Yes, excellent, Mark. Wow,
Yeah.
you're hitting it out of the park today.
Yeah. That
So,
again, that wasn't research. I promise. I promise.
Samhain nowadays, though, is the word for the month of November in Irish. That's what it is. Uh,
Okay.
it means it's supposed to mean the end of autumn, but as you said, the old Irish Sav or Sam
Mm,
is summer, and
yeah.
when is end.
Mm.
Why? as linguist John T. Koch notes, why this word means summer's end when we've already had, because Lunasa is the big summer holiday, right?
Hmm.
So why this means summer's end when technically it's the end of autumn and the beginning of winter, we actually don't know. We have no
Yeah.
idea why this is called summer's end.
Mm.
Like I said, especially when we just had autumn and the Celtic summer, technically the height is at Lunasa.
Hmm.
There are some people who claim that some linguists who claim that the original meaning is maybe best explained as first assembly or a first feast of the month, which would make more sense uh,
Okay.
in terms of the mythology.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, that we don't know why it's called Summer's End. The original meaning has been lost to time. That's it.
Okay. Now I'm going to note that I'm doing very well here, not jumping ahead in any way.
You
So
you are you are
I'm just
I
I'm
have
just
given you an extra 10 points. I had a feeling, Mark, that since this is your favorite holiday, that you would do very well on this one.
Yeah, I'm just going, no, okay, I'm sure she's going to cover everything. So I'm just going, uh-huh, yeah, yeah.
So, how did ancient Irish pagans then celebrate Samhain? Not Halloween, but Samhain.
Uh, I'm going to say with bonfires.
Ooh, maybe. So
Yeah,
the real answer is we actually don't know.
yeah.
Most of what we know about possible Samhain practices is gleaned from medieval Irish mythology, right? And that's
Uh-huh.
all ninth century to 12th century, long hundreds of years after the Irish were all already deep into Christianity. So it's
Mm.
really difficult to know. It is possible that there are the two extant traditions that maybe that they gleaned is, as you said, bonfires and
Hmm.
maybe divination. That's
Oh,
the
okay. Yeah,
so
yeah.
those are the two that maybe go back that far. So
Hmm.
according to friend of the channel, Professor Ronald Hutton, none of the Irish medieval tales ever portray Samhain customs. And a text like Sonas Cormac, which says a lot about Bealtaine, which is the
Hmm.
obviously May
Hmm.
Day or Beltane,
Hmm.
doesn't tell us anything about the religious observances of Samhain. That's it.
Which is
Indeed,
which is
the
which is interesting because often, according to people who sort of propose that they have knowledge that for which there's no evidence, they will say that in that sense, that there's a direct dichotomy that one is a reflection of the other, won't they? And
yeah, we
yet,
really
yeah,
don't know. And
no, mm,
it's very sticky. And I know that this
mm,
gets in a lot of people's craw, and I know that a lot of people get very adamant about
passionate.
yes, passionate
Yeah.
about and
Mm,
listen, it's my as I say, it's my favorite holiday.
hmm. Hmm.
This is my favorite time of the year. So
Hmm.
I am somebody who is very deeply attached to Halloween and everything that we celebrate now for sure.
Hmm.
But in terms of what traditions were actually Irish and what traditions were when we're talking about for Samhain specifically, we
Hmm.
don't know. Bonfires and divination, those are the only two we have. And again, that's because of the mythology. And the mythology is very late, very late.
Yeah. Yeah.
A lot of what we think Samhain is about comes from Geoffrey Keating. And he claimed that the Druids of Ireland used to assemble on the hill of Talcha on the night of Samhain and make and kindle a sacred fire.
Okay.
What that means, how where he got that information, can't tell you.
Oh, is this also where people could get um embers from that fire as
Yeah,
well?
yeah, pretty much, yeah. So the myth goes that they would get
Mm,
embers from the fire on Samhain, and then they would keep it all the way till Bealtaine, and they just kept essentially it's a way to keep the fire going
yeah.
during the cold months and to
Yeah.
keep the fire going all year long. It's a lovely custom, and some people still
Mm,
do it. I mean, it's very common as well in places like Kildare where they have Bridget and her
hmm.
fire is still going, and they just keep the fire going, and you can take a flame from that. But again, we don't know if this is ancient. There is
Mm,
nothing pre ninth century that says that any of this was ancient.
yeah.
And unfortunately, because of Keating saying that, that this was an ancient Druid fire festival, Obviously, Victorians picked it up, and then they made this whole mythology around what they thought Samhain was, as Victorians are wont to do. And then people believed them. But again, there's no evidence for pretty much any of this. Um, there's mention of Samhain in the Book of Lismore, with the fire used to summon the fairy queen from the mist. But again, that's very late.
Mm.
So that like Geoffrey Keating claims that there was a fesh, or a celebration that was held at Tara, uh,
Uh-huh.
and that the Olives came, and that Ireland met to lay down new laws for the year. Maybe that happened.
Okay. Yeah, yeah.
The problem with this, though, is that all of his writings are from the 1600s, and he gives no sources.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So we can't really say anything. There's also obviously there are ties to the monuments, but again, those are all from the mythology. So for example, the Docta and Morrigan are said to have had sex on Samhain. Very nice. Sex on Samhain, but that's from the Battle of Martura, which is again 16th century manuscript, possibly again based off things from 12th century, but
Hmm.
again, very, very late. So we have no idea what the original Irish people may have done on this day.
No.
Hopefully fires, probably fires. That's about it though.
I mean, it's a good time of year for fires.
And that is the
Yeah.
thing, is that this might
Yeah.
just be it's just that, oh, the ground is dead. Gotta light fire, and it's getting cold. Gotta light fire.
Hmm.
All right, Mark, this
Yeah.
question is just for you.
Okay.
Is Halloween an ancient festival about the demon lord Samhain?
No.
Thank
No, it's
Christ.
not. Lord of the Dead, according to, was it DeLacy?
Oh, so close,
No?
Valancy. So,
Delancey. Yeah.
this actually a little bit of backstory. So this
Mm.
actually was the thing that prompted me into studying Halloween because about a year ago, I found a book that was written in the 1960s. It was written by a creditable author, published by a creditable publisher, and the very first thing in this book says that
Uh-huh.
Halloween is an ancient Irish holiday
Yeah.
in which the Druids worshipped. That's how you know it's false immediately. In which the Druids worshipped
Mhm.
the demon lord Samhain.
Yeah.
And I threw the
Yeah.
book and went, "What the heck is this?" And I said, me, who obviously studied Irish, I thought, who wrote
Mhm.
this? And
Yeah.
so I did
Yeah.
digging, and I discovered that this information was gleaned from an evangelical pamphlet, which in turn was gleaned from, as you said, uh, a report from a British military surveyor who did
Yeah.
not speak Irish. His name was
No.
Charles Valancy. He was out to demonize the Irish people, and he claimed that the word Samhain was talking about a god called Balsav, which
Yeah.
is a god that doesn't exist in the
No.
Celtic pantheon.
No.
There is absolutely no Irish god by this name. The
No.
mistranslation was picked up by Protestants who went on to willfully misunderstand what the word and the
Hmm.
and the Irish traditions and the holiday was about, giving rise
Yeah.
to the idea that Samhain was some ancient Celtic demon that they were, or god of the dead that they were celebrating.
Hmm. Yeah.
S-
Yeah.
Yeah, there's no,
Uh,
there's absolutely no evidence for that at all.
no, no, and stop me if we're going to come on to this later on, but this whole thing, which we've heard in other capacities throughout our quizzes, of sort of borrowing aspects of paganism as seen through a Christian lens, is one that Halloween absolutely suffers from. I mean, last night,
Yeah.
well, over the weekend, actually, 2 nights on the trot, we were staying with friends, to help them do bits and bobs, and uh, we were talking to our goddaughters and their parents, wonderful people, basically family. Um, and she of the couple is from very close to where Mrs. Soup is from,
Hmm.
and so people literally think that they're sisters. They look very similar to each other, in many respects. But we were talking about Halloween, and Nicola says, oh, isn't this the thinness of the veil, and all this sort of stuff was coming out, uh, and this is where I genuinely, folks at home, I really feel Like I love these quizzes, but I have a love-hate relationship with them because you want to feel it, don't you? You want to feel that way at this time of year. You want
Yes,
to
I'm
be
sorry, Mark.
to feel the sort of the cold dark encroaching on you, and the light and the
As we
possibilities.
always say when we do these lectures,
Yeah.
people make up new customs all the time.
Yes.
And that's wonderful. And that's
Hmm.
fine. There's nothing wrong with making up a custom, making up a, everybody now tells spooky tales on Halloween. That's
Hmm.
wonderful. That's great. That's the stuff we love. Just don't say it's ancient
Yeah.
because we know we have the receipts and we
Yeah.
know it's not.
Yeah. Yeah.
I know it really is terrible because it does ruin it. I have a friend who invited me to a pagan ritual in which they were going to invoke the dead. And I said, "You mean neo-pagan?" And she
Mm,
paused and went, "Yes,
mm,
neo-pagan." And again,
yeah.
that's fine. If you
Yeah.
want to make this now about the dead, that's incredible. I love that, and I'll be
Uh-huh.
there. I will be there. I will
Hmm.
celebrate. But just don't tell me it's ancient pagan because it really is awful. Knowledge
Mm,
is really awful.
yeah.
Ignorance is so wonderful. It
Yeah.
really is. Um, Speaking
But
of
obviously,
which,
keep watching, folks. Join us in the misery.
yes.
Yeah.
Join us in the misery as we discover whether or not
Hmm.
Halloween is the Celtic New Year. Is it the Celtic New Year, Mark?
Now, so could we just check how many questions have we asked so far?
One, two,
Thank you.
three,
Yeah.
four,
Yeah.
five. Five.
Oh, yeah, no, it makes sense. No, we're good. We're good. Um, is it the Celtic New Year? And there's a reason why I'm thinking very hard about this. Um, there's so many people, even people who I respect and have written about this, that say yes. But the only origin I can find for this is an assertion by a Victorian gentleman.
Yes. 10 on 10,
So
Mark.
yes,
Oh,
yeah,
you're such a good boy, Mark. You learn so
thank you,
nicely.
thank you.
Yes,
Yes.
I'm very sorry, kids. Actually, most of the legend, if we're talking mythology, most of the mythology points to summer possibly being thought
Yeah.
of as the Celtic New Year, so probably Bealtaine. But there is no evidence for
Mm,
Samhain or any other Irish pagan festival around this time of the year being
yeah.
thought of as the New Year. It was Sir John Rhys, as Mark said, a Victorian who
Yeah.
claimed it was the old Celtic New Year because he
Yeah.
saw a custom on the Isle of
Hmm.
Man that the Manx called Hogupney, which is very close to Hogmanay.
Hmm.
And he thought it was, therefore, he thought it was an ancient Celtic New Year.
Yeah.
But there is no other source for this. And
No.
unfortunately, Sir James Fraser took this man at his word and wrote about it in the Golden Bough, saying that it must be the Celtic New Year because it's Hagapne, which means New Year in,
Yeah.
but that's
No.
it.
Yeah.
This is a Victorian anecdote. There is nothing to predate this whatsoever, and
Mm.
it is really depressing.
And yeah,
Um,
it is a real shame because actually, even that Trick or Treat book, Lisa appears, as far as I've read, to accept that it is a new year of sorts, and it's the one thing that given that she's fairly, and actually I highlighted this to you earlier in the week, how she'll just say no, wrong, and this kind of thing all the way through. It's the one thing that she doesn't actually examine and justify.
yeah,
Um,
because there is no evidence, like we said, there that it's
mm,
only this one anecdote that we have from
yeah.
Sir John Rhys. Professor Ronald Hutton does, and he did an amazing paper called uh, I think The Celtic New Year and the Day of the Dead, which
Hmm.
will be part of our further reading. And he does a full examination. And this is literally the only source is this one Victorian man.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah.
There's nothing in the ancient Irish mythology. There's
Mm,
nothing in Gaulish. Like there's nothing for continental Celts either. The colony calendar, which obviously is in pieces,
mm,
but the
mm,
colony calendar does not suggest that this time of the year was a new year.
Mm.
That's it. And as we said, that even in the myths, it was just considered to be one of the quarter days. There is
Mm.
nothing that suggests that this was a new year. As we said, this might have been a magistrate new year
Hmm.
in which they made new laws, and maybe kings came together or people came together to assemble around a bonfire, but
Yeah,
that's all we
potential.
have,
Well, potentially
potentially.
new
Yeah.
laws, maybe taxes, things like that, administrative stuff. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Mm. Okay.
Next question.
Yeah.
Is Halloween an ancient Celtic day of the dead?
No,
No.
no,
This was a
no.
who made up this theory, Mark? Who was it?
Oh, I don't know. Was it him? Was it Delancey?
It was Victorians in general.
Oh, Victorians. Oh,
There was a
okay.
popular theory put forth by Victorians that this was the ancient Celtic Day of the Dead, and it has long since been debunked. There is
Always.
no
Yeah.
evidence that Samhain, or whatever else you want to call this holiday in any of the other ancient Celtic languages, there is no evidence that Samhain was originally about honoring the dead. None of the,
Mm.
importantly, we know this because absolutely none of the Irish myths mention it.
Mm.
There is no mention of dead worship. There's no mention of gods of the dead. Dawn's not mentioned. Crom Crua, Crom Dubh. They are in the ancient myths. They are not mentioned at all.
No, no.
Their ancestors are not mentioned. Going
Hmm.
to visit ancestors are not mentioned. Worshiping the dead is not mentioned. Nothing. There are some people who believe that maybe it was like the spooky aspect of it came from maybe the fear of your own death because winter's coming. That makes a
Uh-huh.
lot of
Yeah.
sense, especially this
Yeah.
time of the year. But it was two real sources that suggested this. One is Sir James Fraser. Thanks, dude. Great. Again, and he said this with no evidence at all. And the
I
second
get
one
the
was
impression that there are some people, him included, maybe Geoffrey of Monmouth and Gerald possibly, who you would just, if you could, even just open a wormhole to get your hand through, you would travel through time and just slap them, just, and then they wouldn't know why or what happened.
I would give up
Maybe,
one finger just to poke
yeah,
Geoffrey of Monmouth in the eye.
yeah,
If
yeah,
I had to
and then
lose
it
it through a wormhole,
closes. Yeah,
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 exactly. If I had to lose
yeah.
it through a wormhole, I would rather my pinky get stuck in his eye for all eternity for the confusion that he has caused. Yeah.
Uh-huh. Yeah, yeah.
Actually, the big source where people think that it's an ancient Celtic Day of the Dead is from the New Catholic Encyclopedia.
Oh,
Yes,
okay.
which is really weird. But the
Oh.
New Catholic Encyclopedia, citation 2003, claimed that it descended from a Druid festival of the dead, which is really
Interesting.
strange.
Yeah.
I don't know where they again, no sources, and it's
No.
hilarious because this idea of it coming from a Druid festival of the dead, I mean, we're going to see in a minute where All Souls Day actually does come from. So keep that
Uh-huh.
in mind when you're thinking, why did the Catholics say that this is a Druid festival day of the dead? It doesn't
Yeah.
make any sense. So I'm going to read you a bit from Professor Ronald Hutton's paper
Okay.
on the Celtic Day of the Dead. He says. Samhain had been the pagan Celtic feast of the dead, but he researched this. This is Sir James Fraser he's talking about. He researched this belief by a simple process of arguing back from the fact that 1st and 2nd of November had been dedicated to that purpose by the medieval Christian Church, from which it would be surmised that this had been a Christianization of a pre-existing festival. He
Mm.
admitted, by implication, that there was, in fact, no actual record of such a festival, but
Mm.
inferred the former existence of one from a number of different propositions. That the church had taken over other pagan holy days,
Hmm.
that many cultures have annual ceremonies to honor their dead, commonly at the opening of the year, and that, of course, the 1st of November had been the Celtic New Year, which obviously has been debunked. He pointed out that although the Feast of All Saints and All Hallows had been formally instituted across most of Northwest medieval Europe by Emperor Louis the Pious in 835, on the prompting of Pope Gregory, that it had already existed on this later date of November the 1st in England at the time of Bede. He suggests that the Pope and Emperor had therefore merely ratified existing religious practice based upon that of the ancient Celts. But again, as Professor Hunt says, there was no previous evidence for this. That's when Sir
No,
James
yeah,
Frazer came up with this. And it
yeah.
has caused so many problems,
Hmm.
really, just for studying the holiday.
Hmm.
And he concludes this by saying it may well be suggested that the imminence of the most frightening of the seasons, frighted festival that brought it in across much of Northern Europe with a numinous significance in none of the medieval literatures that purport to represent pagan times for their societies, Welsh, Irish, or Icelandic. On the other hand, does there seem to be any clear association between this festival and the human dead? It is likely that the pre-Christian societies of ancient Northern Europe, in common with so many across the world, had an annual festival to commemorate those dead, but no direct evidence of one survives.
Yeah.
That is the definitive answer.
Yeah.
So then
Okay.
why did Samhain or Halloween celebrations persist in Ireland of all places?
Uh, well, just because Ireland is a very uncivilized place, and
Says the man who's married to an Irish person. I can hear them in the background going,
what the fuck? No, 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 no. Well, but and also to be fair, I have Irish family as well. No, no. I think that's basically where a lot of the Victorian idea comes from. Is that
"Oh,
these
that's an
things
interesting
is that
point. That's an
yeah.
interesting point."
In so much as I think, and we'll probably return to this, so I won't go too much into it. But I think it was nice and convenient for people, for example, like an army engineer going over to Ireland, to be able to sort of imagine that they were traveling somehow back in time as well as
Mm,
through space.
there is that
Um,
whole
there's like a
romantic
romantic,
aspect. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, and we see it in other parts of the world at that time. This whole Orientalism, the
Hmm.
mysterious Orient, deepest, darkest Africa, Ireland and Scotland, and to a certain extent Wales weren't immune from that. So, um,
That's an interesting point. The answer I was going to give is really it's
yeah,
because Ireland remained Catholic for the most part. Remained
okay,
Catholic.
well, it's the same thing. Okay, fair enough.
Yeah, yeah, essentially, yes. And Catholicism is obviously very, very heavy ritualistic,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And so when the rest of the British Isles went
And
through
they've
the
they've got that
Reformation,
encyclopedia as well.
yeah, yeah,
The
yeah,
encyclopedia
exactly.
itself says,
Catholic
yeah,
Encyclopedia
yeah,
said,
yeah.
"Oh God," but
According to the book here, it says like
well, it's
you're gonna do this.
when
Yeah, so
when
go
was the Reformation,
on.
Mark? Do you remember the year of the Reformation?
1532.
Ooh, very good. So the Reformation happened in the rest of the British Isles, but in
Hmm.
Ireland, for the most part, they stayed Catholic. And
Yeah.
so they continued with their Halloween celebrations while
Mm.
Halloween was pretty much forgotten in Britain for a very long time.
Yeah.
It ended up being morphed into other holidays,
Mm.
specifically Bonfire Night, which we
Hmm.
don't have in the rest of the world. You guys have that. Do you want to tell
Yeah.
everybody what Bonfire Night is quickly, Mark?
Well, interestingly, Bonfire Night, that was also known as Guy Fawkes Night, and then
Hmm.
I think there was also Guy Fawkes Day briefly as well. Is the celebration of the continuation of Parliament despite a Catholic plot to blow the place up. Guy Fawkes infamously was one of the members of the conspirators gang, who was caught in the act apparently of being about to set off the explosion underneath Parliament, and he was tortured to the extent that he could no longer properly sign his name at the end of that process. But nonetheless, he did sign a confession. Um, and it's interesting because essentially what they did was they moved. Um, and this was also at a time when you had lots of other interesting things happening in terms of publishing of the Bible in English. You had uh, sort of almost like bylaws being created around religious observance within the state and the state's influence thereof. And what they did was they borrowed stuff that was already happening in and around the 5th of November was when the plot was meant to happen. So it ended around the end of October, beginning of November, and just broke it up a little bit. And you had this sort of state sanctioned celebration of essentially, I suppose, the foiling of a terrorist plot by taking things such as bonfires, which were being used up until that point around about the end of October, and using them for this, yeah, basically a very formal state event. And it's an interesting one that you don't really think about as a British child, even growing up in Wales, for example. We didn't really think about it as being anything other than when the time when ooh, fireworks were about to be set off.
Hmm.
But the reason why no one else does it is because of it, because it's attached very specifically to essentially it's a politicization of a celebration, and therefore it's unique to to the well, yeah, this island, I guess, these isles, if you really want to extend it further. And I guess one more thing I would say is that it's annoying if you're a pet owner, because at this time of year, all the
Yes.
supermarkets are filled with flipping fireworks stalls and stands, and any Buck Egypt can go and buy them. And as soon as they're available, they're being set off, whether it's daylight or not. They're just so. I would, I'm living for the day when fireworks are silent, and and you don't get people just enjoying the boom. But that's just me being grumpy. Mm.
So we talked about, so that's Guy Fawkes Day, War Night, and
Yeah,
but there are other holidays that are associated with Halloween. Do you know what
yeah.
Martinmas is?
No, no. Is it? Well, is it? Is there a Saint Martin?
Ah, very good, Mark. So Martinmas is Old All Hallows. So just like how we
Okay.
have Christmas Day and we have Epiphany, which is Old Christmas, so
Yeah.
too we have All Hallows Tide and we have Martinmas. Martinmas is
Okay.
Old All Hallows, and I actually had to ask Professor Ronald Hutton about this because so in certain places they don't celebrate Halloween, but they do
No.
celebrate Martinmas. So specifically places like Germany, continental Europe,
Mm.
much of continental Europe, but the eastern part of continental Europe celebrates Martinmas instead. And Martinmas is Old All Hallows Tide purely because of the calendar change, which stranded some Hallowmas customs at the later feast, especially in continental Europe, where the change in the calendar occurred earlier.
Mm.
So the Feast of Martin would have been established by the 6th century, when his cult was booming, so says Professor Rohan, which was well before All Saints became widespread in the 9th century. Uh, and so therefore now we have to ask the obvious question of, was Martinmas a pagan holiday?
uh, I don't know. Was Martin a pagan? I mean, really, that's my question.
Martin of Tours? No.
Yeah.
Um, we don't even
Uh,
know if he lived,
no, no.
but no, I mean in the Roman world, the 10th of November was considered to be the beginning of winter.
Okay.
But it doesn't seem to have any connection to this at all. Martinmas, though, does have its own customs. People eat Martinmas goose, they have Martinmas beef. It is the sort of like the beginning of the winter reveling holidays as well.
Hmm.
Here in Canada, the 11th of November used to be Martinmas, and now it's Remembrance Day. It also used to be our Thanksgiving. So we did have a lot of that, again, that Christian overlap of
Mm.
Martinmas, Thanksgiving, and now we obviously Remembrance Day is not a Christian holiday,
No.
but it does have that whole the reverence around that day.
Hmm. Hmm.
It's still mumming still takes place. People still go guising in German and Dutch speaking towns. They have lanterns that are called Lanternlaufens. Apologies
Hmm.
for my German. And they even have processions of horsemen going around who are said to represent Saint Martin. And Saint Martin is a gift giver. He comes around the Rhineland region and he does give gifts. So,
Mm.
and I even
Okay.
asked, this is obviously anecdotal. I have two German neighbors, one from the Swabish region and one from Bavaria. And the one from Bavaria said he said that they don't celebrate Martinmas, but they do celebrate All Souls Day, and they go to graves and they picnic with the dead and that kind of thing. And then the one from the Swabish region said that she did celebrate Martinmas as a kid. So there
Okay.
really is a divide, at least in Germany, as to which day you celebrate for what.
Right.
So it's very interesting. Essentially, like a lot of broadly speaking, the countries that remained Catholic or the regions that remained Catholic celebrate All Hallows.
Yes.
And when the calendar shift happened, some things got stranded at Martinmas, other customs got completely forgotten. And then when certain countries became Protestant or they decided not to be Catholic, any part of the Catholic Church anymore, they just got rid of their All Hallows celebrations altogether. So let's talk about what All Hallows actually is. So Mark, what is All Saints' Day?
Uh, Unfortunately,
Did we
the
lose you?
internet,
Okay,
yes.
so let's
Sorry.
let's
Sorry.
talk about what All Hallows actually is.
Well, actually,
So,
sorry. So just before we do that, can I ask? Can I just come in with a question at that point? Sorry.
no, yeah, of course.
Yeah. Okay. So, so St. Martin's Day. Okay. Just for the boys and girls at home, do we want to explain what mumming and guising is, or are we going to
Oh, we're
come on
gonna
to
do
those?
that. We're gonna do that.
Okay. Okay. Okay.
We will, because yes,
Cool.
because obviously, I mean, here in Canada, we do have a mumming tradition, but we kind of got it from you
Yes.
guys.
Okay.
But yes, we do have tradition of mumming and guising. But we are going to talk about that when we talk about where trick-or-treating comes from. But
Okay. Cool.
let's talk about first
Hmm.
what All Saints' Day is. Mark, what is
Yes.
All Saints' Day?
Uh, I'm going to say it's a it's bound to be a feast day, I'm guessing.
Hmm.
And is it a day when you basically mop up you mop up all the other saints that
Pretty
you haven't
much, yes.
celebrated?
Yes, pretty
Yes.
much.
Yes.
There were too many saints to
Yeah.
put because every day on the liturgical calendar has too many saints attached. So they just decided it's an early medieval holiday that began in certain parts of Europe. In some parts of Europe, it was the spring, and then it was moved to November 1st, officially in the 8th century.
Hmm.
But by interestingly though, by 800, we have evidence that churches in Ireland, Northumbria, and Bavaria were already commemorating All Saints on November 1st.
Okay.
So
Okay.
there were some places where it was in spring, and there were some places where it was done in November. Some
Mm.
manuscripts of the Irish Martyrology, which date to around 8th century, around that time, have the commemoration of All Saints on November 1st. But in the 1790s, Alcuin of Northumbria recommended holding the feast on the 1st of November to his friend in Bavaria. So again, we had again the connection between Ireland and Germany here,
Mm.
holding the feast at the same time. Um, as we saw with when we talked about Martinmas, people were already celebrating the many saint days that cropped up. So we obviously it was Saint Martin, Saint Michael
Hmm.
on September 29th. Obviously Saint Nicholas, everybody knows Saint Nicholas, I think. So we had so many saints days now cropping up that
Mm.
they just decided, as you said, to scoop them all in and
Yeah.
let's just
Yeah.
get one day where we celebrate all of them.
Just
Um,
move, put that bread around the bottom of the pot of the bowl. Just yeah. Yeah.
exactly.
Hmm.
And it was Pope Gregory III, finally he dedicated an oratory in the old Peter's Basilica to relics of the holy apostles and all the saints and martyrs and confessors. Uh, all are just made perfect, uh, who are the rest throughout the world, he said. So and that's that. So that started being All Saints' Day.
Okay.
But that has kind of faded in most places in favor of All Souls' Day. Mark,
Mm.
what is All Souls' Day?
Um, this is a guess. I'm guessing that it's connected uh to mumming and sort of for some reason I keep on getting this muddled up with Terry Pratchett as well, so, like the Soul Cake Duck. But
Yes,
there
yes,
were
but that's right. That's soul
yeah,
cakes were made for Souls' Day, absolutely.
yeah, and that people would
Saint
go
Martin is
around
really the soul cake.
exactly. And that people, especially kids, would go around sort of dressed as often saintly figures, bishops and the like, and get cakes in return for prayers for the recently deceased, I think.
Oh, very good. But okay, so All Souls Day is November 2nd, but it was
Uh-huh.
established by Odilo of Cluny. and his monastery. So somewhere between 950 and 1030. Okay.
Okay.
And it was soon adopted by the whole Western Church. Odilo instituted the annual commemoration of all the faithful departed to be observed by the members of his community with alms, prayers, sacrifices for the relief of soul suffering in purgatory. So purgatory
Yes.
was well established because obviously, purgatory in general is not in the Bible, but purgatory was well established around 1100.
Hmm.
And it was we talked about this when we had Dr. Dan McClellan here, but the Second Council of Leon in 1274 was when the church finally defined what purgatory was and
Yes.
established it as part of Catholic canon. It became a day of prayer and remembrance for the faithful departed, observed by Christians, as we said, now on November 2nd. It's always been that day. Um, uh, and through prayer, ascensions, alms, and visits to cemeteries to
Hmm.
commemorate poor souls in purgatory, to give the departed their favorite indulgences. So baking bread, bringing them bread, lighting fires as well. So this is where soul cakes, barmbrack, Maltese bone cookies, all of these things come from, all
Hmm.
made in honor of the dead. Obviously, barmbrack has a divination element to it. But all of these breads, these special breads, were made in honor of the dead. Some people took them to graves and obviously decorated the graves and candles and such. At the Reformation, though, purgatory and praying for souls to go to heaven was completely abolished, right? They don't believe in
Yeah.
purgatory.
Yeah.
So All Souls was removed from the Protestant liturgical calendar. And
Yeah.
Catholic countries, as had maintained the tradition, like obviously Ireland, parts of Germany, France, Spain, Portugal, and continue to maintain. But this is where we get the whole thing of ghosts, supernatural, the dead. It's all from this. It has
Yeah.
nothing to do with anything before this, but this is where the whole aspect of this day being spooky or ghost-like or ghosts or
Mm.
people coming back to visit you comes from.
Yeah.
Um, and
Yeah.
actually, interestingly, very early in Western Christianity, we have ample evidence that the custom of praying for the dead uh, in inscriptions of catacombs uh, with their constant prayers for peace of the souls of the departed and early liturgies commonly contain commemorations for the dead. So this practice goes back a very, very, very long time. In 6th century, it was customary in the Benedictine monasteries to hold commemoration of the deceased members at Whitsuntide, so in the summer. But this was established as a wide Catholic holiday on November the 2nd.
Okay.
Um, and like I said, it goes back a very, very long time.
Mm.
So All Hallows, has mostly died out, as we said, in places like England, Protestant countries for a very long time. But instead, there were other festivals that came in and filled up the place. One that you mentioned,
Yeah.
Mark, and then another one is Punky Night. What is Punky Night, Mark?
I don't know. Uh, but the reason why I say that is that I don't know if I know it by a different name. It's the
What
thing.
name might you know it by?
So, I mean, so one of the names that came up during the weekend in our conversations when I was disappointing my goddaughters about the history of Halloween,
Oh no.
um, yeah, was things like, so even in Sunderland, people in the 70s growing up with Devil's Night as opposed
Mm.
to Halloween itself. Mischief. Oddly enough, I came across a word gating night.
Yeah, that's another one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Are these the same thing or
Great
not?
question. Are they the same thing, Mark?
Dwi ddim yn gwybod. I do not know. Like,
So
I'm sorry.
Punky Night, which has nothing to do with spirits because people mistakenly thought this had something to do with pucks. This does not.
Yeah.
According
Is it
to
more like,
Roud,
yeah, punk? Is that, yeah?
no, unfortunately, it
Oh,
was
okay.
mostly done in Somerset, and is done on the last Thursday of the month instead of the 31st. Uh,
Okay.
and punkies are the mangolds that they are the mangold wurzels that they carry around
Right. Yes.
with
Yes.
some candles in them. They also make seed cakes or siblet cakes, and they play games. Some people say that this is an ancient holiday, but there is no proof of Punky Night being even mentioned
Mm,
pre-19th century. Sorry.
mm.
So it's possible that it just might have been a revival of old Halloween customs that they're just celebrating now. So what is
Yeah.
Mischief Night, Mark?
So Mischief Night, if we go by the one and only holy text that is the Crow, um, it's when you get a bunch of people driving around going, fire
Fire
it
it
up,
up.
and blowing up arcades.
Yeah, why would they blow
Um,
up arcades? They're so
I
lame.
don't know. Yeah, they so yeah. I'm so gutted that you see this beautiful antique uh pinball machine get smashed. I'm sure it was already broken. I'm sure it was, but yeah, gutted. No. So Mischief Night. The night before Halloween, my understanding at least, and it was a night when people basically just let loose because they figured. Well, it's meant to be sort of almost like a balance, isn't it? The idea is that you're balancing out your impulses with a call to reflect upon saintly things the following day.
And so Mischief Night might be calling back the essentially the era of misrule because
Ah,
the whole point
hmm,
of winter holidays, a lot of them have to there's licensed misrule on a lot of these winter holidays. So
hmm.
Mischief Night actually depends where you are because as you rightly said, in some regions it's the night before
Yeah,
Halloween. Um,
yeah.
in many places, like Scotland, Canada, the US, that is the night before Halloween, or also, also called Devil's Night. In parts of Northern England, though, it's the night before Bonfire Night. So it's the
Interesting.
4th of November. And
Ah,
the earliest use we have of the phrase Mischief Night as actually as old as 1790, when the headmaster of school encouraged uh, people as an ode to fun, which praises children's tricks on Mischief Night in most approving terms. That's how they were allowed to, again,
okay.
it's license misrule. So same thing at Christmas, same thing at Epiphany.
Yeah.
It's this
Hmm.
whole idea of boy bishops flipping roles because it's dark and you need something to do and you need to have some fun.
Hmm.
The concept of Mischief Night is definitely older, as Puritan Philip Stubbs decries the May Day Eve Mischief Night as early as 1583. In the east coast of the US, it's known as you said, Devil's Night, and sometimes it is known as Gate Night or Gating Night as well.
Yeah.
Gate night I've heard in the Midwest. So,
Hmm.
and I don't think we use that phrase in Canada. So that must be a Statesian thing.
Well, my understanding is that it comes from people taking the gates, literally lifting the gates off the homesteads of people that they didn't like, and then stacking them in the middle of town. Um, and this was where a little bit of research came up. Or this, my reading highlighted this, where apparently there was a one particularly infamous gate that was subject to this ritual, which involved actually taking the gate apart. Lots of people involved in this, carrying it and then putting it back together in the middle of town,
Oh, that's
so
great.
as to, yeah.
That's
But
great.
you've got to really, want to do mischief to have
That's
an
that's
engineering
work.
core. Yes, yeah, it's impressive.
Yeah,
You know, bolts
that
and
is
rivets and things.
oh,
Yeah,
that's amazing. I love that. That's
yeah,
fantastic. No, we don't have that custom here, but I hope
yeah,
it's still going on somewhere.
yeah,
That's dedication. I hats
mm,
off to you, whoever it is that still
yeah.
celebrates Gate Night. Um, Amazing. All right, Mark, another question to disappoint your goddaughter.
Uh-huh.
What do witches have to do with Halloween?
Ah, sweet FA.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Sweet Fanny
Mm,
Adams and for nothing,
hmm,
so nothing
hmm.
originally. Let's be very clear on that. That
Yeah,
nothing
yeah,
originally, witches were never associated with Samhain,
no,
or
no.
Halloween, because remember, wise women were celebrated up until Puritan times. So
Yeah, yeah.
it's
And we've
impossible.
established in the following the interview you did with Jason Kingsley that you are basically the crone. You go around harassing knowledgeable people with religious anecdotes.
Questions.
Yeah, you just go, and people are like, she's very wise. Yeah,
Oh,
um,
I will imagine myself in that book when it does come out.
exactly. Yeah,
But yeah,
yeah.
nothing. Witches originally had nothing to do with the holiday, and they weren't associated with Samhain or with Halloween
Mm,
until the
mm,
18th century. Um,
no.
because the holiday before them really was just about the saints and the dead and had nothing to do with magic or evil or demons.
Mm.
It's mostly due to witches being associated with spooky things and human bogey figures. That's about it. Many of
Yeah.
the references to burning witches with Hallows fires that we have are all modern. They're all
Hmm.
modern, like on the island of Man, where they claim to have made a bonfire surrounded by like divination stones to ward off fairies and witches. That's a big thing. They do that also in Scotland, where they make a bonfire with divination stones, and like, if you,
Hmm.
depending on which
Hmm.
stone you kick, you might get visited by a witch or a fairy. But witches only adopted Samhain into their sabbats when Wicca appropriated Samhain into its wheel of the year. And now, obviously,
Okay.
it is the day for witching.
Yeah.
It's the day upon which I come out and speak to
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
children.
Exactly. And crone people. Yeah.
Yeah, so
Um.
nowadays it is the big witch holiday, but in ancient
Mm.
times, absolutely nothing. Like we said, 18th century is
Oh,
the earliest association.
do you know? The other day, someone said to me, "Have you ever been to the US?" And I said, "No, I haven't."
It's fine, you're not
And they
missing
said,
anything.
"You always like," and they said, "Would you like to?" I said, "Not at the moment, no." Um, but yeah, never mind. I mean, New York is up there. I'd like to see New York, but I've also heard it's very crowded and smelly. But I would love to
It's
go.
much
I
better
would
than it
love.
used to be. As a child who grew up there in the 80s, it's actually right now, it's actually pretty good.
Okay, okay. But I would, yeah, I would, even though it's probably, at this time of year, um, uh, just full of commercialization. I'd love to go to Salem, and it would be fantastic.
Oh, that's a gas.
Uh,
New Hampshire's
yeah,
amazing.
mm, yeah,
It's fun to drive through there.
yeah. And
But
maybe do like a whole East Coast sort of New England kind of tour, and stop off at Christine McConnell's house, to say hello. It'd
all the
be, yeah,
resident
go
witches
to
just
Rhode
wave.
Island.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Bring them
exactly. Yeah, it'd be
cookies.
fantastic. Yeah, yeah, I'd love to do that. Ah,
So
anyway.
as we said before, you wanted to talk
Hmm.
about guising, and
Yeah.
so was trick-or-treating originally a pagan custom?
No,
No. There
no,
is no evidence in the oldest references to Samhain or Halloween that talk about
no.
guising, dressing like the dead, or even going around to neighbors.
Yeah.
So trick-or-treating in general came from two customs. Okay, one was
Hmm.
holding vigil for the souls, and going souling or soul caking, as we said before, going around with the cakes, getting alms, providing entertainment
Mm,
for the wealthier. So this way, the wealthier would give out either cakes
mm,
or alms,
hmm.
and guising.
Yeah.
So guising in general. So guising for at least for Halloween seems to be either to ward off bad spirits
Hmm.
or to frighten them away, or maybe to invite your ancestors or something like that. Nobody's really
Yeah.
sure about that one. But again, it seems to be part of the whole licensing of misrule.
Well,
So
in that sense, it's literally being disguised as well, isn't it? So you
yes, and
are
so this,
somewhat,
as we said,
yes.
this custom happens many times in the
Mm,
calendar, like Thomasing on the 21st
hmm.
of December. And as we said, people going around. Think of something like caroling. I mean, caroling started as a dance, but now people go
Mm,
around caroling, singing for money.
mm.
It's very common in the winter months for people to come around like that. It was a way to make sure, essentially, that the poor would have something to feast on or to eat during the
Well,
beginning
and
of the
that's the
winter
thing.
months.
We can't just have charity. They've got to dance for their food, for goodness sake. You know, we don't. We can't.
Redistribution of wealth, Mark.
We,
Redistribution.
I'm not just going to give you money. Dance for me, peasant. Um,
That is kind
yeah,
of
unbelievable. Yeah.
yeah. So there are some people who believe that it may have evolved from a tradition of impersonating the fairies to ward off the fairies, but again, that's all much, much later.
Yeah.
Um, Impersonating spirits or souls was also believed to protect yourself from them, so that's possibly where it came from.
Hmm.
In Ireland, costumes were sometimes worn by those who went about before nightfall collecting for the Samhain feast, and that's pretty much where modern trick-or-treating comes from, is people
Yeah.
going around door to door doing plays or perhaps again guising, mumming, in
Hmm.
order to get money or food for poor people before All Saints
Mm.
Day. So that's where the Halloween, the night of, comes from. In
There's
Scotland, yeah.
a I was going to say that there's a related sort of remnant that still happens here, linked with bonfire night, where
Ah,
people will collect so-called collect a penny for the guy, and
ah,
so
ah.
people would take the effigy that used to be traditionally of Guy Fawkes around,
Which is where we
and
get the word
ask,
guy from.
yeah, exactly, yes, and get money basically for having. I've never really understood that one. It just seems like we've stuffed this sock with straw and drawn a face on it. Give us some money. And it's just like okay, okay. But the only time I've seen it in person, oddly enough, though, was a couple of years ago here in the northeast of England. And I think what happened was, as far as I can tell, some kids just went, "Oh, this is great! I can just go to the supermarket and ask for money out." So that's what they did. They just had this they were, penny for a guy, and I was like, "What? Are you Victorian? Where did like where did you come from?" Um, but
What's the
it's a
music?
connected
Pipes for
sort of thing.
sale. Pipes
Yeah,
for sale.
exactly. Yeah, yes. I'll polish your shoes. Yeah. Um, but yeah, I think it's related sort of the idea that it's a time when you can ask for stuff from
Yes,
people.
this is the beginning of winter. It's a time when you can ask for things. So in
Yeah, yeah,
Scotland, young men went to house with masked, veiled, or painted, and would threaten to do mischief if they weren't paid or if they weren't given
yeah,
something. So
yeah.
hence the trick or treat.
Mm,
We don't know whether this was to personify or to ward off evil. No idea.
mm,
Probably to ward off, to be honest, because like we said, the holiday didn't have any evil associations until Americans gave it one.
mm,
Wearing costumes at Halloween obviously spread everywhere in the 20th century, as did playing pranks, pretty much.
mm.
Even though there are other mumming traditions associated with Halloween. Like we said, this is just the first of the winter festivals that have guising. People go around Boxing Day, St. Sylvester's Day, Epiphany, even all the way till Easter. People go think of going around at Easter, right?
Mm.
And it really is just a way to redistribute the wealth and let poor people have a chance to participate in the holiday without being embarrassed, essentially. I think that's
Well,
really,
actually, oh, okay, yes, okay,
I think
yes,
that's really
yeah, yeah,
what original guys, when you wear the pillowcase over your head,
yeah,
the guising was because it was a way for poor people in the community to ask for alms without having to be ashamed of it. So.
yes. That's a very good point. Yes, yes, yeah.
I mean, there are other guising traditions like we talked about for St. Sylvester's Day. There is a Sylvester Klaus who is a big man with bells, and he just goes around shaking at other people's house, and you give him a drink or you give him something, and then
Hmm.
he will go around and shake his bells and ward off
I
evil.
could do that.
Yeah,
I could, just cover me in bells. That would be brilliant.
yeah, you
Yeah,
could. It's a custom still going
yeah.
on in Switzerland, so you could knock yourself
Oh,
out.
I've got to get to Swiss. Oh, okay, that's a bit too
The
far to
Alps are
travel.
lovely.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, Mark.
Around here, just have people like, "What are you doing, man?" Like, trust me, if
So
we were in Switzerland, you'd be giving me money. Like,
You you could, as we say, you could start the custom. You could start
yeah,
a new
yeah,
custom and go around and
yeah,
do it, and then everybody will follow. Why not?
yeah, yeah.
There, start it to claim that you're the new Swiss Association, and just
Exactly.
on Saint Sylvester's Day, just start going around going chick 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 chick, and then put your hand out, see what happens. If they're great
And what's the
costumes,
worst that
they're
could
really
happen? Yeah,
amazing. But I
yeah,
mean,
yeah.
again, they're not the only guising tradition. We have as well the kukri in Bulgaria, the giant headed monsters where they go
Uh-huh.
around and they shake dance like that. It's
Oh, okay.
amazing. It's really amazing.
Cool.
But there are tons of these mumming traditions and guising traditions all over Europe. Even in Japan with the Namahage. My favorite,
Yeah.
the Namahage,
Hmm.
who
Hmm.
come
Hmm.
down from the mountains in Akita and they come down with their knife and their bucket and they threaten the kids to be good. And if
Yeah.
you're not good, they're gonna come get you. But if you're good, they give you mochi.
Yeah.
So,
Oh, okay.
but it's the best thing ever because they come through towns and they go, "Rrrr," and they start making crazy noise
Hmm.
and they bang on houses, they run through houses. And so the parents invite them in to chase out bad spirits. But in return, they make sure that the kids will behave for the coming year.
Nice.
But
Yeah.
this custom of some kind of spirit coming down and warding off evil or blessing a place is all over. It's worldwide.
Mm.
And
Yeah. Yeah.
it's usually in the winter months in order to
Mm.
ward off disease, evil, cold, etc. Next question, Mark.
Uh-huh.
Is the Jacko Lantern the head of a pagan god?
It's not. No,
No.
no, no.
There
It's
was
just
there
not.
was a story that it was supposed to be like the head of the Irish god Crom Crua or Crom Dev. There is no evidence of this. This is all made up by
No.
Victorians. The term jack-o'-lantern was originally used to describe the visual phenomenon of the will-o'-the-wisp, the foolish fire,
Okay.
in
Yes.
English folklore. It was used especially in East England, and its earliest use dates to the 1660s. And the
Ah.
Oxford English Dictionary records the use of the term in Britain from that time, and more prevalently around 1658. Again,
Hmm.
in reference to the igneous fatus, all the way from 1600s to 1704. And then from then it started getting associated with lanterns and watchmen.
Mm-hmm.
And then there was the legend of a character named Stingy Jack. And this became a modern Irish myth that he was somebody who went up against the devil, played a little trick and lost, and so he lost his head. And therefore they say, oh, that's the origin of the jack-o'-lantern. No, it's not the origin of the jack-o'-lantern at all.
Okay.
Um, Christian doctrine about purgatory, though, says that it's the purgation of souls that was lit up by fire. And we know in places like Ireland and Germany that they made the lanterns. So obviously in Ireland they used turnips. In places like Germany they used Swedes. Obviously pumpkins were not available until very recently. And they would hollow them out and they would put lights in them as the people lit their way along the procession of probably getting alms. And
Yes.
so it was supposed to, I guess, represent the purgation of souls. But that is also debated, possibly. In North America, though, when we talked about this in one of our shorts, that in North America,
Uh-huh.
jack-o'-lanterns were done for all harvest festivals, not just Halloween. And most importantly, Thanksgiving.
Yeah.
Thanksgiving, there are Thanksgiving cards with jack-o'-lanterns on them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So this whole idea that jack-o'-lanterns are somehow Halloween specific uh, is in the States at least is not necessarily that true. Now it is, but originally, pumpkins were carved for Thanksgiving, and were given to children as part of their prize for being at a play. So
Yeah.
that's it. There's a obviously that it started getting associated with Halloween later on, but poet John Greenleaf Whittier, who was born in Massachusetts, wrote the poem The Pumpkin in 1850, which
Mm-hmm.
mentions Thanksgiving and not Halloween. Um,
Okay.
but many people think that because of the legend of Sleepy Hollow, that the pumpkin is associated with a demon, or that pumpkin faces are somehow demonic or pagan. But
Mm.
even in Sleepy Hollow, he doesn't mention a pumpkin as the head.
Yeah.
No, in the original
Yeah.
story, it's not mentioned. It's really just in the Disney adaptation that they made it a pumpkin, that he's
Yeah.
flaming pumpkin that he's throwing at people.
Yeah. And then, well, yes, and then of course you have. Are you talking when you say the Disney adaptation? Are you talking about the Tim Burton movie, or are
No,
you talking about the animation, the
the
animated
animation. Yeah, yeah,
movie?
the
Yeah, yeah,
animation.
yeah. Because obviously then Tim Burton went on to use it as well. And the only thing that bothered me about that imagery was when the horseman throws the his lit head in the at Johnny Depp at Ichabod. Um, it doesn't. It's not rolling. It's flying straight. I know it's like cinematography.
It's fantasy, Mark.
Yeah, no, 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 no. In terms of cinema, I understand it makes sense to have the face go, oh, but it would be rolling. But yeah, so that took me right out of it.
That took you.
Yeah, yeah. As a kid,
The
I was like,
suspension of
oh.
disbelief was broken.
And you know,
Uh,
on a similar note, and this is a slight tangent, but on a similar note of physics of flying things in Hollywood, the same goes for Robin Hood's arrow
oh.
in the Kevin Costner Robin
Uh-huh.
Hood Prince of Thieves. When he fires it, they just show it's like a camera eye view, isn't it?
Yeah,
And
where it's just yeah,
the blade is straight; it's not spinning. It
yeah.
should be spinning. Yeah,
No,
I believe Men in Tights got it right.
Of course
But
it would. But
yeah.
jack-o'-lanterns weren't only in reference to Jack. They were also called many other things. They were called hobney lanterns. And there are also other things that are called Jack o' something. So for example, you were mentioning the effigy before. There used to be a Jack-o'-lent who was
Okay.
it was in the England in the from the 15th to the 17th century. And they would make a straw effigy and they would burn it around the season of
Mm,
Lent.
mm,
In Swiss folklore, there's the Jack of the Bowl, which is a helpful house spirit. So this whole idea that the Jack o' Lantern is somehow an Irish demon, a demonic spirit, named after an Irishman is completely false. Not at all.
mm. No.
Speaking of
Okay.
people with no heads, Mark, is the
Yeah.
Dullahan based on a pagan god who comes at Halloween?
I mean, I've got to say no, haven't I?
No, no. No,
Yeah.
unfortunately, some Victorian folklorists name Crom Crua or Crom Dove, uh, thinking that the Dullahan must have come from them, which is
Hmm.
where they think the Dullahan, like the dark one, came from, but is particularly active at Halloween. But all of this was made up by modern folklorists. There is no association with Dawn, the Irish god of the dead. Some people claim that Dawn made the Dullahan, but again, those are modern stories. That's it.
Mm.
Very importantly, however, that the Dullahan follows a long-standing tradition of headless horsemen throughout medieval Europe, and is not necessarily distinctly Irish. There are no references to the Dullahan in the Irish Folklore Commission.
Oh.
Yeah, so it might be an
Mm.
American Irish thing that then traveled back to Ireland.
Okay.
And the earliest mention that we have of the Dullahan is from Thomas Crofton Croker, who claims to have gotten four different stories about the Dullahan from local people. Um, but he also talks about the headless coach or the Cushigan Can, and it's also called the deaf coach, Cushivohar, the coach on the road. Um, and that's the name that's given to the vehicle, but it's the Dullahan that drives the coach.
Yeah.
And that
Yeah.
he's the headless person, made very famous, I think, by Darby O'Gill and the Little People, where you
Uh,
see the big coach coming and him riding the coach.
yeah.
Um, and there are these sources say that the driver was headless. They don't call him the Dullahan, but just that the coach had a headless driver. But the thing is that the Dullahan, unlike what people think, in all of these stories, the Dullahan was never there to kill you or to scare you. He was there as a way to pick you up if it was your time to go. So you would see, according to the stories, you would see the coach or you'd see the driver, and he would go, ugh, and he'd get in, and
Yeah.
and you would get in, and that's it. There was no, I mean, in some of the stories, people try to cheat the coach and all that kind of thing. But the
Yeah.
coach was not coming for you if it was not your time. That's the whole aspect of it.
Okay.
Dawn, the god Dawn of Dead, is mentioned in the Liber Gabála and the Dinsenachus for Chechtun, which is where his house is, and that he's two different figures, the god of the dead, and the father of the two Danan. But until recently, they're not associated with Samhain, winter, or neither are they headless. They don't ride horses. So again,
Mm.
like I said, the headless horseman archetype and mythical figure has appeared all over Europe since the Middle Ages. So it's not necessarily distinct. Now, the Dullahan and all of the folklore that has come out now is obviously very Irish, but it's not based on any kind of Irish god, Celtic god. I think this is this kind of bogus idea that
Do you
came.
know, I, I mean, we may return to this at the end, but I just wanted to say, like, we really do love this holiday.
Yes.
It's just that everywhere you turn, there's just like,
Everywhere
it's
I
just not
turn, I
ancient.
heure
Yeah.
things like Halloween is, and
Yeah.
there are a couple of Irish creators who do go through this, and they actually do get upset that Americans think that they're celebrating an ancient Irish holiday.
Yeah.
And the Irish creators say, well, we know what Samhain is, but your version of Halloween is not that. And
No.
even though now in Ireland we celebrate Halloween, Samhain is a separate holiday that's
Mm.
celebrated by neo-pagans, and they're not
Mm.
celebrated the same way.
Yeah.
And so there are a lot of Celtic Reconstructionists who don't like that American Halloween, or that Halloween as we know it now has been sort of stamped onto their holiday. And I totally understand their disappointment.
Yeah.
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 To be fair, though, the Irish Tourist Board leads into this
Yeah.
because,
Yeah.
so for example, they like to say that the puka is like the great mascot of the holiday. So, Mark,
Hmm.
what does the puka have to do with Halloween?
Well, I think as you know, and as everyone at home knows, I'm sure, through these conversations, puka is definitely, uh, in terms of its origins, that is, absolutely, undisputably, actually, connected to Ireland. And it what it has is this deep sort of Emerald Isle core that's very Irish.
Is it, Mark?
I shouldn't do that. No, no, it's not. It's not. Unfortunately, no, it's not. No.
I had this Dr. Anthony
Uh,
Delaney in his history, one of his history hit programs After Dark, told people that the puka was an ancient Irish ghost.
yeah.
And I had to write a letter about it because it is unfortunately not true.
When you say you had to write a letter,
I am usually not that person, but again, this is an Irish person with a PhD who is
yeah.
telling people that, first of all, that puka's not a ghost,
Mm,
who is telling people that puka is always been associated with Halloween, etc. That's not true.
mm,
And you can say it is now. Again,
hmm,
you can say it is now, and it
hmm.
is, but don't say it's ancient. So another name for the night of Samhain was Puka Night. But we have to say the obvious thing, which is Puka is Old English.
Yeah.
That is what the word is. Because, do you remember why, Mark? Do you remember why Puka has to be an Old English word?
Oh, because it has the letter P in it.
Oh, Mark, you listened so nicely.
Yes,
Yes.
yeah. And
It
actually,
can't, yeah,
I should say, if you go back to the headless, the what was the word for the headless
the gun
carriage?
can without a head can.
Yeah, yeah. Ken, pen. Exactly, yeah. So the Ken bit is proof that Puka couldn't, because in the P Celtic world, head is pen, not Ken. Yeah.
Exactly so.
Mm,
Right.
yeah.
So the name was probably imported to Ireland by the Vikings via Old English. The earliest use of the word is 8th century, sorry, which lines up with the arrival of Vikings in Ireland. Whatever this spirit was called before Germanic peoples arrived in Ireland, or whether the Vikings actually imported it to Ireland, that we don't know.
No.
But the puka now is traditionally a shapeshifter that takes on many forms in tales associated just with mischief.
Mm,
And there were tales of the puka coming to take the puka's portion of crops that were left over at Samhain. Or there were also tales of the puka spoiling fruit that were left on trees, and of people making charms to ward off the puka. But again, all of these stories are modern.
mm.
And the Irish Tourist Board likes to say
They
when
love it.
they love it because they go, Ireland, the home of Halloween. And now they have the Puka Festival, which is a beautiful festival
Yeah.
that just celebrates the day. It's not pagan, it's not Christian. It's just a cultural festival. Now,
Hmm.
just that's just a fun event about Halloween. So speaking of your part of the woods, Mark, do the Welsh celebrate a pagan Halloween holiday?
Uh, uh, Kalan Gaev.
Yes.
Yeah,
Which
it's
means
first day of winter, basically.
yes, 10
Yeah.
points, Mark. Amazing.
Yeah. Connected to the Latin Kalends as well, isn't it? In that
Yeah,
sense.
Mark,
Yeah.
so good
Mm.
today. Wow, I
Thank
am
you. Thank you.
thrilled. Gold stars.
Yes. I think my lack of throat has meant I've had to engage my
You've had
brain
to
more.
read.
Yeah. But no, so yeah, Gaev is Welsh for winter. Yeah. So,
And
Um,
is this a pagan holiday in Wales?
no.
No.
Well, it's a uh it's complicated, isn't it? Because I grew up with it being something like that. Lots of people I know do something like that at the on the 1st of November or thereabouts. But no, it's not an ancient traditional thing.
No, it's that
No,
this there's no evidence before Middle Ages,
no,
just like Ireland.
yeah,
So
yeah,
it probably is kind of the same thing where Wales retained. It
yeah.
is one of the three ghost nights,
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
it is beloved in Wales.
Yeah.
There now they say things like a spectral white lady, and the
Mm-hmm.
tailless black sow is
Yeah.
very prominent in Welsh literature. But again, remember that's all medieval.
Yeah.
All of it associated to this time.
Yeah.
What is blood moneth, Mark?
I mean, it sounds like Blood Month.
Yes, that's
Um,
exactly what it means.
I've never heard of it.
So blood
What?
moneth is what Bede calls the 1st of November. He claims that it is
Interesting.
uh, it really is just that it's a time upon which um, people I say sacrifice, people killed animals that they couldn't afford to feed for the rest of the year, and they just made meat with it.
Okay.
So
Okay.
they cured meat and that kind of thing. But a lot of people claim that this is evidence for Germanic people celebrating a pagan holiday at this time. Um, but it was a time where medieval folks cured, killed, smoked their meats,
Yeah.
hoping that it would last them throughout the winter. Bede tells us that these animals were dedicated to the gods, but he didn't appear to know how. And that's it. That's
I
all
mean
we know.
that sounds again awfully like your man going to Ireland and being like, I hear in these parts you guys, I've never heard of a stamp. Look at this, and just impressing people with, with a lighter or something.
And this is
Um,
why I would love to poke Bede in the eye.
yeah, yeah.
Could you give us
I yeah, in that sense,
something
show your
else?
receipts or shut up, Bede. Yeah,
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 exactly.
yeah.
As well, there's also Winter Nights. Winter Nights is a Scandinavian holiday.
Uh-huh.
Uh, Winter Nights was earlier in October, probably somewhere between the 11th and the 17th. Nowadays, though, from the calendar switch, it's between October 9th to the 27th Gregorian calendar. But we actually don't know if this was an ancient Scandinavian holiday or whether this was a Christianized one because of how late the sagas were written. The sagas do talk about winter nights.
Yeah,
Norse people were Christianized around 900, again, depending on where they were and that kind of thing.
yeah,
So we don't know if winter nights was originally a pagan holiday. Not sure.
yeah. And even if people want to claim that there's wriggle room there, regardless of when these areas were officially Christianized, the influence and individual families taking on religious belief and also just stories spreading was happening for centuries beforehand. So yeah, it's a as ever, it's complicated. Yeah. Mm.
Just to speak briefly about the Slavic side of things, there are two different traditions. And it's pretty much the same thing. So in the rural areas though of places like Poland, they they all celebrate Souls Day. They go to the graves. But in other regions, there's a whole custom around somebody called Dziadi. Sorry if I pronounce it incorrectly, or Jadi, I think, in which there's a play that's performed. And from my
Uh-huh.
Polish friend telling me, she said she absolutely never wants to celebrate this again because it's a play that's very depressing and
Oh.
about beggars that come around. And again, so they also have their own traditions that are
So is it
linked to
kind of
this.
like there but for the grace of God kind of story, People come around and go, well, at least you've got
Yes,
10 fingers,
and
I've used all mine up, that kind of thing. Yeah.
this play is
Yeah.
actually it's based on books, and the books are quite long.
Right.
So but they do have their own Day of the Dead or Halloween traditions as
Interesting.
well.
Okay.
I'm quite surprised though that you haven't asked about the elephant in the room.
I mean, Fuji-san's wearing a lovely costume. I wouldn't say he's that big. Like,
But we've been talking about All Souls, and we've been talking
uh-huh.
about a celebration of the dead.
Yeah.
What
Oh,
ho
Dias de los Muertos. Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
surprised you
Yeah.
haven't asked about it. So, Mark,
Uh-huh.
I would like you to look at. So for those who are only listening, I have put
Uh-huh.
4 pictures in the chat.
Okay.
Mark is going to look at the pictures. I'm going to
Uh-huh.
tell you what's in them. All the pictures are nearly identical. They all show the same thing. They
Okay.
show graves, they show flowers,
Uh-huh.
they show candles, and they show offerings, either on something that's being offered or on
Uh-huh.
the graves themselves.
Hmm.
Mark, you are going to look at these pictures and you are going to tell me which one of these is Dia de los Muertos. Which one of these is Mexico?
Okay, so the first one seems to be almost like a succession of piles of presumably flowers and things with candles. It's almost like a series of waves, or like middens of light going back into the distance. The second one appears to be more certainly I can identify as a graveyard. I imagine the first one is a graveyard as well. Slightly more colorful, more in the way of flowers, and it's sort of dusk. So people have been lighting these candles presumably all day, and now the sun is setting. The third one, very Christian. Again, I imagine all of these are Christian, but you can see lots of crosses, lots of individual, fairly standardized crosses actually on graves and candles. And people, in this instance, actually, people are in and around those graves, and taking a moment uh, to consider things. And then the fourth one, sorry, is uh, much darker later at night. And again, we have lots of graves, candles, and a sort of a processual way down the middle that goes towards a sort of a presumably maybe a shrine to Mary, possibly. Um, which one is? Now, are we asking which one is in Mexico?
Which one of these is Dia
Yeah,
de los Muertos?
I'm going to say they're all different versions of it.
What do you mean?
Well, if we take this to be a time when you visit the dead, you remember the dead actively, and you maybe take things to them and you place candles upon their graves. I don't imagine that you have to, that just one part of the world has a monopoly on that practice. So
Ah,
I'm going to be really cheeky and flub it and say I think they're all flavors of a Day of the Dead.
Mark, you saw through my artifice. None of them is Mexico.
None of them. Interesting.
None of
Interesting.
them is
Okay.
Dia de los Muertos. And I did this
Okay.
purposely because these pictures have been used as stock pictures for
Oh,
Dia de los
right.
Muertos because they
Yeah.
all have the same flowers, they all have the same lights. And so one of
Yeah.
them is in Ireland, one of them is in
Okay.
Malta,
Yeah.
one of them is in Bangladesh,
Okay.
and one
Yeah,
of
I
them
can
is
see that.
Germany.
Right. Yeah.
And I did this because there is the unfortunate question that we now have to ask.
Uh-huh.
Is Dia de los Muertos a
Oh, yeah.
pagan Mexican celebration?
Um, I I'm gonna say that it is, as with lots of things in Mexican Catholicism, it is very, it's hard to pull apart. So I'm gonna say technically no, but the cultural door is open to things like, for example, uh, handling the remains of the dead and polishing bones, this kind of thing, which also actually is a Catholic practice. It's something which they used to do in the early days of the Christian church in a sort of a Roman world. So, in that sense, Catholicism wasn't too shocked by handling the remains of the dead, but often it's done today in not just in Mexico, but Mexico often is often a focus um, at this time of year, almost with Catholic sort of cover, but they talk about it as having um, indigenous pre-Columbian roots. So I don't know if do you know what I mean? 'Cause I don't want to say they're definitely making it up. but I imagine that for anyone doing it, it's indistinguishable actually.
There are,
It's really
so
hard
this
to pull
is
apart.
wildly debated for all the reasons
Yeah,
that you just stated. Many Mexican scholars believe that this is mostly a Catholic holiday from All Souls,
yeah,
brought over by obviously the Spanish, but that it is mixed with some indigenous practices that
uh-huh.
were celebrated in rural parts of Mexico, or maybe only in Oaxaca, because that was where Dia de los Muertos is very, very popular originally.
Mm.
There was the Month of the Dead in Aztec culture, but that was in August. And the church moved certain venerations to All Souls Day. Certain
Mm.
customs, like the marigolds specifically, might be very old, but as you have just
Hmm.
seen in all these other pictures, other people bring chrysanthemums, which are
Yeah,
very close. And
yeah,
that, like I said, this is worldwide. That's why I put the picture of Bangladesh in
yeah,
there as well. It looks pretty much the same. Obviously, there are very distinct Mexican flavors to things. Like Santa Muerte
yeah.
is the Holy Death, the skeleton saint, which the church is not happy about. They don't like that because they
No,
think because their whole idea is that, oh no, like you were saved with Jesus, you shouldn't be
yeah,
praying to death. That's the whole point.
yeah.
So Santa Muerte is a new cult that's been popping up in Mexico in recent years. And La Caterina, the mascot, the lady, the skeleton lady with the big
Oh
brimmed
yes, half.
hat.
Yes, yes.
But we know that she was invented in 1910 by a Mexican painter named Jose Guadalupe Posada. So, and she was intended to be a satire of the wealthy, and she was based on the current dictator's wife at the time.
Okay.
And now she's obviously this everybody loves Katerina, and they put her up
Mm,
there. Mexican
mm,
historian Elsa Malvido, researcher for the Mexican Instituto Nacional de Antropología, or Antropología, sorry, for my Spanish, completely discards any native or syncretic origin, arguing that the tradition can be fully traced to medieval Europe. She
mm.
highlights the existence of similar traditions on the same day, and not just in Spain, but in the rest of the Catholic Southern Europe, and in Latin America as well, where ofrendas, or offers of the dead, sweets in the shape of skulls, and bread in the shape of bones exist in many other countries.
Yeah.
Opposing views assert that despite the obvious European influence, there is proof that of, as you said, pre-Columbian festivities in certain regions that were very similar in spirit. Um, so that's all we have.
Mm,
The celebration included such elements as the placement of tamales on altars. This is the old celebration,
hmm.
near burial grounds of warriors to help them on their journey in the afterlife. But really, it was the Mexican Revolution in the 1910s that really pushed this to the fore, because there was a big push for Mexico to have its own identity and to have its
Yeah.
own things. And so it took this day and made it into their own holiday with their own flavor, with their own brand. And it was really in the 1930s that there was a zest for making things look more pagan than they actually were.
Yeah.
People claim that the sugar skulls are 3,000 years old, thanks Martha Stewart.
Yeah.
But that is not
Yeah.
even historically possible. Sorry.
No. No.
In Spain in the 1500s, All Souls Day was actually a massive deal. And in 1671 in Spain, they actually call it Dia de los Muertos
Hmm.
in Valencia. Other historians also point out that as for how big Dia de los Muertos was, before around 15 years ago, there was very little celebration outside of the countryside. James Bond very famously depicts
Hmm.
the procession in Mexico City, but even
Yeah.
as the director pointed out, there was no procession in Mexico City at the time. It
Yeah.
was afterward where Mexico really liked this and they went, sure, we'll do it. And so now there is one, but most Mexicans have said that they don't even recall seeing a Dia de los Muertos anything when they were younger. Dr.
Yeah.
Andrew from Religion for Breakfast points that popular culture like Grim Fandango, Book of Life, and Coco, along with now people all over the world getting to see Dia de los Muertos and loving the aesthetic, that it really has popularized the holiday when
Hmm.
it usually stuck to the rural, and especially the Oaxaca region. The mariposas, the butterflies, also might obviously be a very old thing because that's their migratory period, right? The butterflies are
Yeah.
coming back to Mexico around this time of the year. Other countries like the Philippines has undas, where they also have ofrendas and they go to graves. Malta has they do the same thing and they have the entire month of the dead where they make little bone biscuits and
Hmm.
they leave it for the dead. And Poland has an identical celebration for All Souls as well. They bring flowers and the candles and they bake breads for the dead as well. And as you saw from the pictures, Catholics in Bangladesh even put lanterns on their graves and flowers on their graves also.
Yeah.
So that's our discussion of Dia de los Muertos,
Yeah.
kids.
Yeah.
Um,
I suppose what one question that I have is why do we think at this time of year, and you've touched on it a little bit earlier, this idea of looking into the future, trying to figure out things like, who you might marry or what the
I really
future might
think it has
hold.
to do with the fact that everything is dying at this point. And
Yeah.
they really think it has to do with people, because it seems to be there are two major times of year when people do divination things. One is
Mm,
now, and the second is usually sometime at the beginning of spring or
yeah.
beginning of summer. And I think it's a way of looking ahead on the year. If you think about it
Mm,
from just a rural aspect or an agrarian
mm,
aspect, your crop is in, and
mm,
now you have to wait out the winter. So might as well do
mm.
some divination to see how the winter's going to go. Who knows who's going to die in your community? People might
Yeah.
starve, people might freeze to death. So
Yeah.
same thing with the springtime when
Mm.
everything's growing and you're nervous for how
How
the
well is it
harvest
going
is
to
going to
grow?
go.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Mm.
exactly.
And I suppose because something I guess we haven't touched on is the fact that you would have things like kids burning nut shells. You'd have dropping hot lead into water. Again, my goddaughters found this absolutely hilarious because they and their dad were like, "What? This sounds very dangerous," and also therefore really cool. Things
Yeah, of
like
course.
trying to snatch money, like prize money, out of a bowl that's got lit alcohol in it. This kind of
Oh
thing.
my gosh, that's
So yeah,
awesome.
so danger and as you say, divination in the dark with little flashes of light. Even apple bobbing has an aspect of
Yes.
chance to it as well.
Hmm.
Um, and is this where what we can do for those people who are feeling possibly a little depressed at the lack of certainty? What we can point to is the fact that that vibe is very real in that sense. I mean, we say
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
not ancient, but a lot of these things are older, for example, than the founding of the United States, for example. They are old. They're just not as old as some people hope that they would be,
Hmm.
aren't they? Um,
So, but
yeah.
if all of this is really, if All Hallows in general is just a vestige of Catholicism, of medieval
Hmm.
Catholicism,
Hmm.
why does anyone think that any of these customs are pagan?
Because and this goes back to hanging out with the girls and their parents is they all think it's cool. It's cooler if it's pagan. It's a little bit naughty. It's a little bit mischievous. It's a little bit
And
unfamiliar.
it really is because the Victorians said it was cool and naughty and
Yeah.
mischievous. Yeah, because
Yeah.
Victorians wanted they wanted this to be a pagan celebration. And so without
Yeah.
any evidence whatsoever, they turned to things like
Mm,
medieval myth to say that it
mm,
was without really knowing, having no archaeological or historical background whatsoever.
yeah. And scant linguistic connections as well. Yeah.
Yeah, almost
Mm,
none. And that
yeah.
is something that we do have to pay attention to as well. So I'll
Mm.
just give you some parting words from
Okay.
Professor Ronald Hutton, where he says,
Hmm.
thus, there is no doubt that the opening of November was the time of a major pagan festival, which was celebrated at the very least in all those parts of the British Isles which had a pastoral economy.
Hmm.
At most, it may have been a general thing among Celtic peoples, but there is no evidence that it was ever connected with the dead, no proof that it opened the year. But it was certainly a time when they thought supernatural forces were especially to be guarded against or propitiated. Activities which took from different forms in different regions. Its importance was only reinforced by the imposition upon it of a Christian festival, which became primarily one of the dead. And it is to the development of that festival that we now must turn.
Hmm.
And and my closing statement is people make up new Halloween customs all the time. There is now a witch paddle in the States where witches go
Uh-huh.
out to the sea, they paddle out to the sea, and they hang out on the ocean, which I think is wonderful.
Hmm.
And everybody has their own Halloween customs. Now we have Halloween parties. We have witch covens that get together. There is no wrong answer when it comes to
No.
celebrating Halloween, ever.
Hmm. Hmm.
But
But
know where it comes from.
hmm, absolutely.
Well,
Well, thank you
Mark,
very much. Thank you.
how did you did amazingly today.
Thank you. Uh, we have so the scores. On this one, I think I might have lost track a little bit, but it's 16 and 7. So 16 plus a star for me, and then 7 for you. So not too bad. But as ever, the real winner was knowledge.
It's the knowledge we found along the way.